Okay, let's jump in. So in this session we're going to be looking at Reactor, player property volumes, and warp volumes, just to get some interactivity and interesting things in our space. Hopefully someone comes in and tells me some cool ideas, otherwise I'll be making it up as I go along. So we'll see how that goes. Let's jump in. Alrighty. So just to go over the basics, just in case this is the first time you've come to Mona, let's look into some of the basics. So we've got the docs. Get started. Now you'll need to install Unity 2020.3.18 at the moment. Then you'll need this Unity template. So we're going to grab this. Go to code, go to download zip, save as to my desktop, which is where it's going. So that's done. Now, of course, if you have any questions, you can get all of the information that we have on our docs. So we have a lot of the details in Create Your Space. We have an asset creation. This will be moved soon to its own subcategory up here, because these are getting very long. So there's that. So yeah, we actually have most of these things today on here as well. So we have Reactor here, player properties here, and warp volumes. So you can use those to check out the details. So we've got that. Super useful. But what's better than looking into it ourselves right here. So I'm going to extract this. So we have our project. And then we can use Unity. Now I have the Unity hub coming up in a second. Like so. So we have our Unity hub with our installs. Now we've got 3.18 F1 is the main one we're looking at here. We're going to open our newly unzipped project. Now, of course, you could put this somewhere else, but I'm going to keep it on the desktop. Double click on that, have those, and then go open. Now, the latest tab has the latest template has the warp volume script, so you can now use that to teleport within your space as you see fit, and we'll do a quick example of that later. So, how are you? How's everybody? This is my first. Is this my first? What's today? Tuesday. I'll go back on Saturday. Yes. So this is my first workshop after getting back from the America trip to New York and LA. So it is really good to have my 3 screens back, so I can actually see what I'm doing. So that's fantastic. All right. So back to the point. So we've opened up our template. Now the first thing we do is notice that it's untitled. This is not what we need. We actually need to go to Mona, load space scenes, and all of this happens. Then we can right mouse click here and go remove scene. So we have our space, portals, and artifacts assets, and our basic scene. Now I could completely change this as long as I keep these things. So we need a space scene, portals scene, and artifact scene. We also need a space object. This has a space tag, portals object with a portal layer, and artifact game object with the artifact layer. All of our assets need to be under these 3 game objects. If it is elsewhere, so if I put assets there, for example, and I close that, that is incorrect. You can even double check that by pressing QA, and it will tell you that it's wrong. For example, you have more than 1 root object in the space scene, so that needs to go in there. Press QA, all good. If I wanted to, I could actually test this as a space, go to playground. We have our playground browser experience and our playground files. We can drag and drop those in. And you have a browser example already made. That's how easy it is to build in Mona. But we want something a little bit more complicated than Portal. So, let's close that. I'm going to delete this. When you build, sometimes this might not update. So you will get a playground that has the previous version and not any of the updates that you may have saved into. So I will usually get into the habit of deleting that before going back and clicking this again later. So let's have a look. So today we're going to be focusing on reactors. We're going to be focusing on player property volumes, and if we have enough time, we'll jump in with a warp volume as well. So let's have a look. Now with a reactor, so I'm going to do a really simple version. I'm going to create a cube. Fantastic cube there. Let's put this over here. And let's do a really quick elevator, I guess. So we'll put that there. Do we want to make it bigger? No, I don't think we do. So we have our game object. Now, within that, we have our box collider so we can get on it. But what I will usually do is I will create an empty somewhere in the space. Now I could make it a child, or I could make it somewhere else. Completely up to you. I will usually use a R to show that this is a reactor object, I guess. And let's say platform. Like so. So once again, right mouse click, create empty, and then we have that. Now, in this case, we can put in our reactor object or script, so that's fine. And we also need to add a collider. So I'm going to put a box collider on that as well. Now, with this said, reactor is not where the activity happens, I guess you could say. What this is going to do is control a animator. Now, this asset does not have one. So if we go to the cube, there's no animator here. So when it comes to Reactor, Reactor basically tells animator what to do. So let's go into an overview of what an animator can do. So an easy go-to for making an animator asset on an object is go to the animation. Now if you need either animation or animator, you can go to Window, Animation, Animation, or Animator. And just go Create. Now once I create an animation, this will add an animator asset, which I can show you in a second. Let's do the first animation, which will usually be an idle animation or the default state of an object. So let's put this as platform idle. Like so. Now, as you can see over here, it has added an animator game object. Animator component. So that's there. With the animation controller, also the animation that we've created. So by using that one button in the animation, it actually sets all this up for you. So I find that really, really easy to do it all. Hey Baran, how's it going? I hope I have your name right. Once again, I think it's every streamer's right to ruin everybody else's name. So I apologize. But welcome to the stream. Just going through the setup of an animator so we can play with it in Reactor. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And feel free to come up with some cool ideas because I'll be happy to jump into them and create them as we go. So, we've got our asset we've created, animator. This has created an animator component with an animation, and it's set this as the idle. So that's great. So let's do a quick idle animation. So I'm going to put the circle on here. Everything is going very well, thank you. Got back from America 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Time doesn't make any sense anymore. And yeah, just having access to my computer is great. Laptops are great, mobile is great. Three screens, a proper laptop, and a graphic tablet is amazing. So that's an improvement. All right. So let's look. So we've got this on. So any movement we do with our asset will be recorded as a keyframe. Now, if I hold left control, I can snap, which I don't really want to do. But for the first one, I will sort of move it up and then down so it's in the same spot. So I can do that. So for our idle platform, let's do a sort of like a bit of a hover. Like a cool hover thing. So it's going to go up a little bit. And go down. So I actually want this. So I'm going to grab this. So I'm going to go Control D. Nope, that doesn't work. So if I click the top one, it'll select all of the keyframes. But if I select this one, it'll just select that. So if I had some more ones. But in this case, it's the same. So I'm going to go Control C. And where my header is, Control V. So that way, it goes back to exactly where it is. So that's great. I can, of course, play this. See the speed. It's a bit fast. So I'm going to select all of that. And let's say drag this to maybe 3 seconds. So it's nice kind of slow hover. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. All right. So that's the idle. So that's just going to loop over and over again. Now, the next thing we want is sort of like a... We could go up or across. Or around. We could do all sorts of strange stuff. Let's just do another one. So, once again, I've clicked the arrow here. You've got platform idle, which we've now finished. And go create new clip. Change this name. I'm going to click on this to save a second. And let's go, I don't know, around. Let's just go around. All right. Yep, that's good. Now, once again, because we've put it in this animation, so it's a bunch here, this will be automatically added in the animator section. We'll get to this in a second, but this shows that these two are connected, basically. So, once again, we want our first asset. So let's go here, because we need to go there. So I'm going to snap that. And let's go, once again, around, whatever that means. Let's go over here. $12 that way. That's so I can do something a bit more. Maybe there. That'll do. Another second. There. And once again, control that one. Control C, control V. Yoop, 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 yoop. That's going to be really weird. So basically what we're going to do is when we get on this elevator, we're going to go around that loop. And that's it. That's our whole plan. Now, this comes up sometimes. Usually I find after you've done certain things, it'll sort of get rid of that. So don't worry about that one. until you've finished the whole reactor process. So, we have our idle and we have our around. Now, the layers, which is the default thing that it will be default to, is not what we need. We need parameters. Now, parameters is like a variable or a name of different types of things or variables. So we have floats, so say 1.0, 1.11111, 7.3. We have ints, which is like 1, 2, 3, minus 1, 2, 3. We have booleans, which is true or false, and we have a trigger, which is like a do this and then reset. So you can just make it do something and not have to worry about setting it back with a trigger. So super useful. We want, what do we want? Let's do trigger, actually. So let's go with capital G. Now, case sensitivity is very important with this because if you get it wrong, it won't connect correctly. So make sure you keep the right. So the next thing we need to do is connect these. So basically, we're going to get Reactor to say, hey, go to a different animation. So I'm going to click on that, right mouse click, and go make transition. And then click on this one. And then I'm going to do the same, right mouse click, make transition, go down here. Now, has exit time. Transition has a fixed time, but usually I will turn these off because I want them to happen when I go in the trigger or exit the trigger. So the transition between these is very short because this is animated. But if I had a one frame animation, I could actually control how long the blend between the two states is. So say, for example, if I have a door, I would have door closed as one frame. And then on the next frame, I would have open. And the transition time between those two would actually be here. So I wouldn't have to worry about animating that. I could just adjust here. So that's quite useful. Now, when you turn this off, you have to make sure this is go. So basically, when we say go here, do this. And in this case, we're actually going to keep this because at the end of platform around, we're going to transition back to idle. So in this case, we're actually going different from the tutorials that I've done previously with the doors and the elevators, where we're going to, once this animation is finished, go back automatically. So trigger it, do this, go back. And that is using has exit time. And we don't need to set a condition for this case. So, any questions so far? Once again, this is purely animator. We're not actually looking at Reactor yet because we need to set the animator up to do this the right way. So, yeah, that's basically it. So next up, let's go to our cube that has an animated anime. You can see the red there. And we have our empty game object, but we've put a mono reactor script on it and a box collider script on it. Once again, you can just do that by typing in React even and then just clicking on that. But we've got it. Press F to go down to it. Now, first we need to, well, let's quickly make the collider. So as soon as I hit this collider, let's go a bit smaller maybe. So I'll make sure that I'm on the collider before I do the whirly, is the technical term. Yep. So when I touch this collider with enter, so I've got on exit trigger, so when I leave the collider, do this. But in this case, when I touch the collider, do this. So we're going to do plus. Element 1 is a terrible name, so let's call it start. No, go around. So as it stands, this is purely just for this. There's no specific name that you need. This is purely for that. So if you have a bunch of them, it makes it a bit easier. We are going to set our cube parameter, which is go, which is a trigger. Now I'm not sure, I'm actually not sure if I have to set anything here. I'm assuming not, so we'll give this a test. But yeah, so make the trigger happen, I guess you could say. Now local allows this to work only on my computer, so nobody else would see this happen. It's just me. So some things would be really useful for that. I've created like a Zelda, like a Zelda 1 where you have top view, and if I go into a different section, I can move the camera just on my computer, so everyone else's camera is still correct. So local is very useful and can be used for really interesting things. So that's a useful one. But I want everyone to see this, so that's not going to be local. So once again, on enter this collider, set the cube's animator parameter go with a capital G, trigger. So make that happen. And that's it. We've got our collider and good to go. So let's see how this goes. Now I'm going to reduce our icons a bit smaller so it's a bit easier to see. And that should be it. So let's test. Now this animation is pretty fast, so we'll see how it goes. So as you can see, the idle is going, which is great. So I'm going to get on it, and there we go. Way too fast. But it does work. And as you can see, it's gone back to idle because it has that exit time to return. So let's jump on it and see if we can get on. Ah. Ah. Okay, try this again. Let's go this way, see what happens. There we go. Ah! Okay, let's try again. Oh. Okay. So, of course, speed is definitely a thing. So you have to be careful with mobility. There are ways you could get around it. So you could put like walls around it if you wanted to. But that's an example of it working. So let's take that and make it work. So for that, we need to slow down this animation. So that's the platform around. Okay. So this is a very important thing. Be sure that your animation, so what's happened is the box collider's center and size has changed. So that is maybe why some of the problem was happening there. So I'm actually going to click on that and press delete. Click on that and press delete. So make sure that once you've finished animation that you turn off the red block, because otherwise what you do in the space will be a problem. So because I've deleted them, I have to redo this. So let's just put that up. And once again, let's actually make this a bit smaller even than last time. Yeah. And then notice how, because the red circle isn't on, these are not getting animated this time. So we want to slow this down. Let's try half the speed. Now notice that I have to select all of these before I can scale all of them. So if I select some of these, I will only scale the ones that are selected, and if I select one, it doesn't even have that. So make sure that you select all the ones that you want to change. Let's go 10 and see how that goes. Yeah, that works. Done. Now notice here, so I'm in the collider still, but I didn't leave the collider to enter the collider again. So this rule of enter collider only happens when you enter it, like that action of entering it for the first time. So you can use that in interesting cases with invert. So each time I go into it, I switch from a true to a false. So you can do all sorts of interesting things. So if I exit this and then go back into it, that will do it again. So super useful. Done. All right, so that's a simple example. All right. Now note this pink one. So when you do some interesting scaling things, so for example, this is like 0.1, so this will reflect in interesting ways. So when you click on the box collider, it shows you exactly where it is still, but the pink one does not look accurate sometimes. So the best one to make sure is click the asset with the box collider, and that will show you where it is. So keep that in mind rather than the pink one, because that can be misleading sometimes. All right, so this is a quick example of a reactor. Now what I'm also going to do is put a new game object on it, and let's call this a PPV. So what I want to do is when the platform is moving, I want everything to have motion blur. So let's do that. Let's just call it the same thing. So in this case, we need to go PP, no, player, there we go. So player properties volume, there we go. Once again, this also requires a collider. So I'm going to put a box collider on this one. Now, when it comes to player properties volume, we actually need to make sure that is trigger is on. If it is off, the player will not walk into the collider. So yeah, make sure that is on. Once again, actually no, I'm gonna just make this bigger, like there, because in this case anywhere I want this to be on. So that works. Okay, now a small note, so this cube has an animator. Now this animator has access to all of its children. So I'm actually going to animate this information from this animator. So let's have a look. So let's put properties down and keep all of these as sort of -1. -1 means default setting. If you roll over these, each of these will show you the default. So that one's -15, that one's 6.5, so that is useful. We have an override button here because -1 could be a gravity. So if you actually wanted gravity to be -1, you would have to turn that on. Any other change also applies. So let's have a look. So platform idle, we want these, what do we want? Motion blur to be -1. Why isn't that working? Interesting. There we go. Let's try this. Ah. Okay. So in this case, it doesn't have access to these. I'll have to look into that, but we can still do it anyway. So I'm going to make sure that this is disabled on the idle. And let's put this, what's this normally? Okay, so let's say 1. We'll see if that's a lot. So on the platform around, we're actually going to make this on. So that will be set to on for this process. And just to make sure, let's make sure it's the last one. That's V. Okay. Alright, so it's off for that. Oh. Interesting. Yep, that's good. And then it'll turn on once the animation kicks in. Any other things we could play with? No, I think motion's good. Let's I kind of want to make this bigger. So we don't have to animate this. This is just turning it on. So let's go 50. Sure. We'll give that a shot. All right. So once again, we have our reactor. So when we go in it, it goes around and it will turn on our player properties volume when it moves. So let's give that a shot. Did that work? Maybe not. And just to make sure, yep, that should work. Should. But it is not. That's an interesting one. Oh, hang on. Okay. Not too sure about that one. I'll have to look into that. But what I will do instead is just try something else. So I'm going to remove this and put it here. So notice when I move something outside of the child of this asset, it can't be found anymore. So I'm just going to remove that completely. And same with around. So remove property. So that's fine. Now, with our asset, I'm going to move this over here. And just for interest's sake, I'm going to do this. So in that, it's going to hopefully work. Yeah. Hey, big yellow fishes, how's it going? Cheers. Are you staying? Is that a goodbye? That's a Either way, thank you. I'll say that much. Excellent. Okay, this is interesting. That is not working. So, huh. Interesting. Okay, bloom still works. Okay. All right. So let's do that one in then, because we know that one works. But for some reason, motion blur, not too sure about that one. But that allows us some room to move. So I'm going to undo all of the things I just did. Hopefully. No? Okay. I'll do it all again then. So, we're going to focus on Chromatic Aberration, because I know that works. So, let's do that. So, once again, we're going to add this. Turn that on. Idle is going to be off. Platform around. Animate. And then turn that on. Okay, so we have to, because we made it a child of the object, put that back. Like so. Alright. Okay. And this is a prime example of holding that on when it shouldn't be. Okay. Alright. Cool. And idle. Alright. Fingers crossed this works. Turn that off. Now, the player properties volume will override whatever the settings that the player has in there. So I'm pressing H to pull up all of this information. So I could have the bloom up, for example, and whatnot. I could put the chromatic aberration really high and very low. But as soon as I get on there and animated, this should adjust this on it. So let's see how that goes. Ah! So that works. Wow. Okay. That's a little high. Pretty funny though. Alright, so let's put that to a reasonable amount. 50. Now, interestingly enough, it didn't reset to off, though. So that's an interesting one as well. So let's just copy-paste that. All right. So we've got that. So that'll be fine. Now, the next thing I would like to do, what could we do with the last one? Teleport. What interesting thing could we do with a teleport? on this. No. I can't think of a cool thing. All right, I'll just add a warp one in this space so I can. That's the basics of the warp volume as well. So let's do that. Okay, create empty. Warp volume. No. Warp volume. No reason. Okay, now warp volumes are very similar to the other two, where you'll just type in warp, so you'll have mono warp. We'll do that. And then you need a collider. So I'm going to use a box collider, although others do work as well. Let's put this. Let's put this as prank, joke, problem. Let's annoy people by, if they go close to the portal, they actually get teleported back to where they start. Now this is a red thing in our portal, so I'm actually going to move that forward. Nope, not that one. Spawn point. Spawn point forward, so it gets out of that collider. Because otherwise, if someone portaled to this location, then they would get hit by the warp volume, which would send them to where we're going to send them, which we don't really want to do. So there's that. You could do that if you wanted to, but no real need to. So anyone who gets near the collider will teleport to basically the spawn point. So we have our empty game object with the mono warp and the box collider. Now we don't have anywhere to warp to. Now if I wanted to, I could actually drag the spawn point. So let's do that actually. So I'm going to drag this to here. Now note, if I go pivot and local, it'll show you where the pivot is on this asset. So it's up there at the moment. And the blue line is the direction that the warp volume will face them. So let's say I actually want to get this to face the portal. And then when I warp, I want it to face the portal as well. If I do not use rotation, whatever angle I enter the warp volume, I will face. Well, let's do an example of that. So when I touch this, go back here. Now, of course, this object that I've dragged on here could be any of these assets. It could even be like space if I wanted to. I'm hoping that it's just on the location, not the child. So that's an interesting case. But yeah. So warp to the spawn point, not facing the direction, and the collider is what we're going to connect with. So that's that. So let's get that a go. All right. So notice in this case, we're actually facing the portal straight away. So that's the spawn point location. We have our platform's going to put on that to see how it's not as bad, but it's not as good. It'll be interesting to see if it turns off. No, that's interesting. Let's see if we can turn it off. There we go. So that's an interesting note, so I'll look into that. Okay, next thing is the warp volume. So I'm going to go to the portal. Now, this is a good example of why the is trigger. So at the moment, the warp volume is not an is trigger, so I can't walk into it, so I can't teleport. So, as always, I did that completely on purpose so I could show you what happens. So let's go back here. So this is the object, so is trigger. So both the PPVs is trigger and the warp volumes need to have this on. Reactors do not, incidentally, but these two do. So we've got that. Let's give it a shot. Right, we've done that. We can go here. There we go. Now notice how if I walk from the side, I will be facing the same direction that I'm facing when I hit the collider. So you could use that for or against you. And let's do another example of our warp volume. Use rotation. Build the playground. So once again, this is the direction I'm facing. Let's go in this way. And that's the same way. But if I do this, I'm facing that way. Now the mouse doesn't change, but the direction that your character faces will change. So you can use that however you see fit. So if I go this way, I'll still be facing that way. So you can use that in all interesting ways. So those are the quick versions of Reactor, PPVs, and warp volumes with a simple platform example. What else could we do? What's a more interesting example, perhaps? So I get rid of that. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to delete this because I'm going to do something a bit more complicated, I think. I kind of want to make a puzzle of some sort. What's a cool puzzle? So we need some assets. So let's do a cube. And let's move it over here. That there. So I want to be able to sort of control something, maybe. Well, actually, let's use a more a complicated example of an animator with more than the basic animations. So let's do that. So let's create one more sort of cube that we're going to control with these three buttons, if you could say. Now, of course, the animations could be a character talking or moving, but in this case, we're sort of focusing on how to control Reactor. So let's look at 3 different animations for this one. So go create. And let's call this. Now, once again, we need the first asset that you create is usually the idle. So let's go cube, idle. And once again, it creates the animation, an animator. And we can do this. So let's do a cute little, not cute, you can't really, or can you? I don't know. So let's snap, slow hover. So let's put it 2. maybe 4. And let's kind of rotate it. So let's see that. Now, because this doesn't have a texture, that'll look like it's looping, even though technically it's not. So, and you can see the snap as well. So I'm going to work with that. So that's state 1. So let's say this one is idle. Well, this one is idle. Let's create a new one. Cube agitated. Let's give it some personality. So once again, we want the snap state to be there. Let's go up 1, down 1, cross 1. I feel like I have to go that way as well. I don't know why. Cool. Let's do some other things like rotation, maybe. So once again, just snap that in there using control. And one more we could do maybe that way. Okay, so that's definitely animation 2. Now the last one, let's do one more. What could it be? Jump. Jump, oh, jump. Now in this one, I actually want to do it so it's not a loop. So we're going to do like 1, 2, 3. Maybe a bit faster on that. So let's slow that down to, yeah, maybe there. Cool. Now notice here it loops, but in this case we actually want this. And we want to turn this off. So you have animations which are the triangle with the line. And we want this one to not loop. So we just want it to jump. So if you go into this one, jump, and then go back to idle. So we can set that up as well. Once again, animator is where the magic happens, and you can do some really cool stuff with that. But you have to have the animations to do it. So because all 3... What's happening here? Because we haven't clicked the object. Now, once you click the object, you can click on this. So we have 3 animations. Now, you could have as many as you wanted in this. It really depends on how complicated your animation is. But because they're all in the same thing, they come into Animator for you already. So let's say we have our idle. We have our jump, and we have our agitated. Now, once again, this will default to layers, so we want parameters here, and then we want different ways to do it. Now, we have 3 states. How do we want to do this? Okay, so in this case, we have 2 static states and 1 loop. So perhaps we want the loop to happen once and then go back to idle. We can use that with the way we did it before. So in this case, we'll have a Boolean. So is agitated true or false? and we'll have a trigger jump. So once again, right mouse click, make transition to jump, make transition to cube agitated, make transition back, make transition back. Now, in this case, if the cube was by giving names, I'm creating life. It's a weird thing. So, if the cube is agitated, it cannot jump. So I'm gonna leave that as an example. This one I actually am doing on purpose. So in this one, I'm gonna show you that if you're in a state, and you don't have access to another state, you can't get there. So the only state that can jump is idle. And when it is agitated, it cannot jump. I can make it, but I'm not going to. So for now, this is fine. Now, that said, we haven't set any of these things to make them. So let's do that now. So on this one, we want to bounce between the two at any time. So we're going to turn that off and put this on. Is agitated true? Yes. Turn that off. Is agitated false? So if agitated is false, go to idle. If agitated is true, go to agitated. Now, this is how long it takes to transition to the state. So I could make this a longer transition, or I can make it shorter. So if you want sort of longer transitions or blended transitions, you would probably make that longer. But if you have two different animations that you want to sort of get to quickly, this animation would be very short. So depends on the case. If you want to write exactly how long it takes, you can do that. So I tweaked it a bit, and it's like a lot. Weird. So let's make this the same, 0.25, and I think it's 0. There we go. So that's a lot neater. So that's ready to go. Now, if I wanted to, I can actually watch it, like see the transition here. So it'll do that, and then do the transition between the two there. Now with jump, once again, I want it to jump at any time. So I will do jump, just jump, because that's a trigger. And then on this one, I actually want to finish at the end of the jump. So leave that on. So at the end of the animation, transition to that. So that's good. All right. So our animator is set up. Next up, we need to make these 3 objects trigger that. So let's have a look. Let's make the first one idle. Let's make the second one agitated. And let's make the third one jump. Alright, so once again, add component. Let's go Reactor. I'm just going to do that with all 3, because it's sort of in there as a type. And we also need to add a box collider as the thing to enter. Okay, now, so first up, I'm going to raise the, let's just make this sort of 4 and 9, that works. Now on enter, we want to, ooh, wrong cube. It goes on that one. Nope, got it all wrong. So this one goes on that one. This one goes on that one. And this one goes on that one. Okay, so make sure you have better naming than I do, because otherwise you have this problem. So I'm going to put that to 0 and that'll go correct. So cube there, cube idle. Cube 2. Once again, wrong one. There we go. And cube 3 is very wrong. Okay, so cube 2, let's move that up a bit. So apologize for that, it's not as clear. Either way, so basically we have our cube and the idle with it. The cube, idle with it, cube, idle with it. That's what we want. And then we have our actual cube. So I'm gonna give this a name, living cube, because it's idle and animated. All right. So once again, we have a cube. This is just a box glider, so we can step on it. I could actually turn that off if it's low enough, things like that. But this is what we want. So we want idle cube. Once again, just the title. Set the living cube's animator parameter is agitated. Now this is a Boolean, and we want it to be true. This is lowercase as well. That's it, basically. So set it to that. And same with this one. So we want agitate, set the cube is agitated, Boolean to true. Okay, so we did this one wrong. This is idled, so we want that to be actually false. And then cube 3, which is jump. Set the animation jump parameter trigger, and the value is not needed for triggers. Okay, now notice when you have a reactor, it will make a line to the animated object. So this icon here is the animated object, and these icons here is the reactor object. So quite useful for tracking that. Alrighty. So that should be it. Our reactor will set living cube is agitated parameter to false, which will make it idle if it's not already. So if it's agitated, go here. And if it's idle, nothing will happen. It will just keep it set to off. And this one over here will make it jump the once and then return. Okay. So make sure that your reactors are actually big enough to work. Once again, sometimes the parameters here are incorrect, so it's definitely click on the object to see the collider work correctly. All right, so note this. Keep that in mind as we test. Okay, so note that it is in the idle state. If I scroll over this one, it will continue being in the idle state. But if I go into this one, it gets a bit agitated. And if I do jump, nothing happens. So that's very important. So let's go over here, and it will go back to the idle, which is what we want, and then jump, and then go back to... So every time I enter, it will jump. But it will not if I'm there. Now that's an interesting one in that I'll have to look at that one. Okay. Alright, so that's that. Now, say for example, I wanted to be able to jump while agitated. So I'm going to add that option. So once again, here, if jump, then do this. Now, we want that to do that at any time. Now, this is where it gets complicated. This is where you need to consider how your loops work. So say, for example, if I jump, this will automatically go to idle. And if I go back here with the same thing, it probably won't know what to do. So if you wanted ultimate control, I'm just going to press delete to get rid of those. So I'm going to move this over here. So in the jump state, I want it to return to the agitated state, and in this case, I want it to do that. So I'm going to click on cube jump, duplicate that, jump, and then once again, return at the end of that. So that way, this way, it will know exactly where to go back to. So if it is agitated, jump and then return back to that. If it is idle, jump and return back to that. Now, these can get really complex. You can do some really cool stuff with Animator, and that's where the magic of Reactor is you can control Animator to do all of the things depending on what you want it to do. So super, super useful. So let's give that a shot. Anyway. So it's currently idle. It is now agitated. Jump and be agitated. So let's go to idle, jump, and be idle again. So, as you can see, like, this is a simple example of a more complicated thing that you can do with Reactor, and then, of course, how far you can take it is quite complex. There's been some great things you can do. Another thing you can do is, for example, copy these, and it will do the same thing. So there's a lot of tools there. So that's a good example of what you can do with more complicated reactors. Okay, what else is there? One more. Okay. Once again, let's get rid of all of these. And this time I'm going to do some material stuff. So let's go to a cube. And I'm going to duplicate that so we know what we're going to step on more than anything else. And in this case, we need a material. So let's add... Let's say it's green. Let's add some emission. Once again, green. Let's make it really metallic. Why not? So we can do that. All right. Let's just call it glow. Put it on our object. So we have our asset. I'm going to name this correctly because otherwise I will make mistakes. So I'm going to do that. And our cube, which we're going to animate. So let's once again add that. Do glow, green, green. Now, I do have to set these colors because otherwise they won't return correctly, if that makes sense. So when I go red, if these weren't animated on the green, then they wouldn't go back to green. So we have to tell it that this is what we need it to do. So that's good. I'm also going to animate the metallics and the smoothness, because why not? So we've got color, emission color, glossiness, and metallic. Excellent. Create new clip. Nope. Nope. That one. And then we're going to change our animation color information to red. So, once again, color, emission. Let's go a bit pink. Why not? That's pretty cool. And let's make it a matte. Like that. Excellent. Okay. Now in this case, we're in the previous examples we've done animation, but in this case we're doing one frame. So I can show an example of this. So let's go to our cube switch. Once again, this is purely so we can see it. What are we doing? So I'm going to create an empty under that. Name that switch. Add a reactor. Add a collider. On enter. Switch. Now in this case, I'm going to go invert. Now you can do addition, so I can say every time I enter +2 or -2 or multiply by 2 or divide by 2 or 3 or 4. Most of the ones I will use set and invert. These ones are good for more complicated situations. So if you have a process, you can go +1 +1 +1. So there are situations that you might use them, but so far most of the situations I'll use is set and invert. Set will set it to whatever you set it to. Invert will switch. So if it's a 1, it'll go to -1 and then back. If it's true, it'll go false and things like that. So I'm going to do that for this one. Now, once again, our animation is on this. Now, always make sure that this one has the animator. If it doesn't, it's the wrong asset and it will not work. So sometimes you'll walk over your thing, nothing happens. There's a high chance that it is that one. So keep that in mind when things don't work, because that does happen. All right. So we have our cube, and we have not set up any of this yet. So we have our green as idle. I'm going to make transition. Parameters, we want a Boolean this time. So I'm just going to say switch. I highly recommend getting into the habit of having your standard. So for these parameters, I will always put a capital letter. That way you'll usually remember to do it. So make sure that if it's lowercase or uppercase, that is your standard, so you don't mess that up, because that's another reason nothing will happen. So keep that in mind. So switch with a capital T, capital S. Whenever I want, switch to true. Whenever I want, switch to false. So these are the two states. Now, because Boolean is invert, I'll go true and then false, true and then false every time I enter. So parameter was switch with a capital S. It was a Boolean. Now, with this one, even though it's invert, so it'll bounce between true and false, you have to put something in here. So trigger, you don't have to, but with Boolean, you do. So I usually just put in true. So that's that. And our box, we can do that. Let's do that. It doesn't have to be a child. Like if it's an elevator, it does need to be a child because the elevator will move. But in this case, it doesn't. None of this is going to move. So keep that in mind. Depending on the situation, your reactor might need to be a child of the animated object, or it might not. So we have that. So we have our indication of where to stand, because if that was not there, we wouldn't know where to go. So that's what the only reason I'm putting it there. But our reactor object will change this object's parameter to true and false. That should be it. So let's see how that goes. So this is a good example of not deleting the playground files. So I've just built the playground files, but it has the previous version. So this is a good example of why you need to do delete. So I get rid of that, playground again. Now we have green box. So, fingers crossed. There we go. So, I've gone on and I've gone off. Now, if I go in again, it will transition between the two every single time. Now, of course, this transition could be things like playing an audio track. So, if you have music, you could turn it on. With a button. Now, I'm not so well versed in audio. I have to play with it a bit more. I don't want to do it because I'll probably make a mistake and spend 15 minutes showing you how to not do audio. So I will be doing a tutorial on audio soon, and I'll probably do an audio reactor example as well. It's a pretty common thing that people do, so that'll be useful for that. So yeah, we can do that. Now that we have a cool thing, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make them a child, and then I'm going to make this a prefab. Right? And then move this across here. And then I'm just going to duplicate a few of these. So we have that. And then we can playground this one. Hopefully I deleted the last one. I did. Excellent. Alright. So because we've duplicated one, we've got that, and then that, and then that, and then that, and then that. So you can do some very interesting things with duplicating assets to create interesting, well, everything, to be honest. So there's that. Now, if you're really smart, and I'm not, I'm still trying to figure this out, but I've done, I did do, and I've actually forgotten how I did this, but I had a counter that had a ticker and an additive approach to have a counter. So you could have it so every time a player runs through it, it adds a it adds a number to that number. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with Animator and Reactor. Now, if you put PPV and warp volumes in the mix, you can do some really interesting things with that as well. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good spot to end it. Hopefully that has helped a few people with understanding Reactor a little bit better. And hopefully you can see the potential for the things you can do. Now, the real craft comes into animating your assets. So, one thing I'd like to try is, say, for example, a bartender. So when you walk to the bar, it starts getting you a drink. Depending on where you are, it could maybe walk up to where you are. There's all sorts of things that you could do with Reactor. Some of the most impressive things I've seen so far is you had a space where wherever you walked, the ground under you sort of had this really cool particle effect. So using Reactor with particle would be really, really good. And also, one thing I'm really interested in is seeing people who are better at shaders than me. So if you have Amplify, or can program your own shaders, you could, what do you call it? I always forget this one. You could expose, that's the one. You can expose a variable to the material, and if it is in the material, you can animate it. So if you could do some really cool shader stuff with variables or numbers or parameters that are available in the material, you can therefore animate it. And if you can animate it, you can control it by Reactor. And if you can control it by Reactor, the avatar can play with it. Now, of course, at the moment we have on enter trigger and on exit trigger. We do plan on adding more events in the future, and a lot more functionality in the whole tool, so you can do some really, really cool stuff. But at the moment, on enter and on exit is all we have. So that said, you can still do a lot with it. So I look forward to seeing what people come up with. And hopefully that's been very beneficial in helping you do so. That said, thanks for joining and have a nice day. Happy building.